Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Speak Up News. My name is Noah, and today Sid and I will be talking about police brutality.
Yeah, and the Black Lives Matter movement is a fight to decrease social injustice against the African American community. And a lot of these social injustices tie in with police brutality and police misconduct.
So, with the topic of police brutality and police misconduct, let's see the consequences of the police who commit these acts. All right. So, in the case of Eric Garner, there was a policeman who was choking Eric Garner, who was repeatedly saying that he couldn't breathe till he died. And the officer, then 3 weeks later, had a judge verdict to just be fired and not guilty of aggravated assault. All right, that's one case. Let's look at another. So, Sandra Bland was placed in jail due to a traffic stop, where days later she died inside the jail. The only criminal the only criminal charge against the officer was perjury, where he was accused of lying on the official police report at the traffic stop. Mind you, she was arrested at a just for a traffic violation. Like an example of a traffic violation is like speeding. Yeah, she went to jail for that. Prosecutors dropped the charges after he said he wouldn't work in law enforcement anymore and give up his license. All right, let's look at the last one. So even with George Floyd's case, the 4 officers involved in his death were initially just fired and not charged with any criminal charges.
Yeah, and continuing with that, our roadmap and guide to our conversation with today is firstly with qualified immunity, then accessibility and transparency of police misconduct, going a little over police unions, and lastly about police reform and defunding police and how those two different methods are trying to be advocated for to improve the situation. And it seems that police are wrongfully harming individuals who are often African Americans and even killing them at times. And in addition to this, there may not be appropriate action or consequences taken for these injustices. So yeah, Noah.
So, all right. So they're protected by something we call qualified immunity.
And according to appeal.org, qualified immunity essentially means that victims of brutality or harassment by law enforcement generally get no relief in court and have no accountability to hold offending officers accountable for their actions. Qualified immunity doesn't just reduce a person's chance for victory in a civil rights lawsuit, but it means that many claims may never even be brought to court in the first place.
And a way to beat qualified immunity is that there needs to be a clearly established law with the same context and same conduct. So instead of looking at violation of people's rights, they need to find a similar court case in the past. So an example would be here, really imaginary, made up, but it'll clearly show the message. So let's say I'm a cop and I punch a kid in the face and the kid wants to sue me. They bring it to court. However, they can't sue me because in the past, there hasn't been any clearly established precedent or past case of a police officer being sued for punching a kid.
And thinking about this, wouldn't there be a way to access records of police misconduct where we can see history of their wrongdoings and fire the people with multiple cases or give appropriate consequences?
Huh. Well, Sid, it isn't easy to find records of misconduct in every state. 38 out of 50 states have records of police misconduct kept confidentially or have limited access to them. Even here in California, a progressive state, a state that pushes for progressive ideals, we aren't even given public access to all police misconduct records.
And some issues also occur in departments that destroy these records. So there's an example. So we're from the Bay Area in Fremont, where the transparency law statewide was implemented in 2019, which gave transparency to certain records to the public if they requested them. This was implemented in 2019, and it allowed public access to previously confidential police records regarding the use of force that resulted in great bodily harm, and also confirmed cases of sexual assault or dishonesty by officers. And even though this happened, many files from the Fremont police, ranging from 1971 all the way to more recently in 2016, were purged or destroyed before 2019 when this transparency law was implemented.
Well, another issue that kind of like protects police is police unions. According to an article from ACLU, police unions have employment contract provisions that shield police officers from accountability and ensure disciplinary processes favor officers over community members. As you can see, there's a lot of things that protect the police with police misconduct. However, there's an act that's being placed and put forth in Congress called the Justice and Policing Act of 2020. So here are a little bit of the provisions that are kind of in it, and I do advise people to look over it, read over it, and kind of understand how this may help with things being told later on about police reform. So some things I took away from it. So one of the things that is stated inside of it is that it prohibits federal, state, and local law enforcement from racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling and mandates training on racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling for all law enforcement. Another thing is that it has provisions that will help lessen the power of qualified immunity that protect the police and make it easier to prosecute and sue police officers. And also help them, it also enforces that they do less actions of violence, such as banning chokeholds.
And from what we know, other than this congressional bill draft, there seem to be two methods that people are advocating for to improve these conditions, and those two are police reform and defunding the police. The bill mentioned previously may be a version of police reform, but there are other suggestions that are being made too, and I'm just going to go over them. So firstly, yeah, with police reform, one of the main campaigns is being pushed is 8 Can't Wait, and just going over it, a few aspects of it, not the whole thing, but one is banning chokeholds and strangleholds. Two is requiring de-escalation. Three, a duty to intervene. So making sure that even if an officer isn't directly doing something harmful, that if they're in the presence of another officer that they do have a duty to intervene with that situation, similar to the case of possibly George Floyd, where there may be one officer that was mainly aggravating or causing the situation, but the other four didn't do the necessary steps to de-escalate that. And the last one I want to point out is just requiring comprehensive reporting to make sure there's accountability with how officers handle situations. And other suggestions may be ensuring body cams and preventing tampering or stopping of footage from these body cams, additional police trainings, and lastly, ensuring justice and correct consequences for unjust actions by law enforcement. Or in support of police reform is they may be faster actions that can be implemented quickly, especially because they may be more concrete in that they work with the current system of law enforcement. And yeah, these can be things that can be implemented quickly. Some criticisms of police reform is that it may not be enough and it may not be the complete solution to many injustices. And a second one is it may even increase funding. So with increased trainings or increased body cams or technology, that may actually increase the funding for police departments, which is something that a lot of people don't want. And yeah, that's just going over it really quickly. And secondly, is defunding the police. And like the name suggests, it's defunding it and reallocating those resources and funds to the community, such as public health and education, especially like with public health, like mental resources and specialized staff for that. And I think the goal of it is to create more equity for wealth distribution and the resources around that. And some arguments in support of that is it's more proactive than reactive for communities and may prevent these issues from happening in the first place instead of waiting for cases to happen or issues to happen. So just being more proactive about it. And some cons or criticisms is it's just a new idea, especially if the law enforcement and police is completely redone. It's a new idea and may come with a lot of consequences, both good and potentially just drawbacks, both seen and unforeseen. And yeah, that's just a quick rundown of those. And what are your thoughts on that, Noah?
All right, so this is the time where me and Sid kind of like share our opinions, and we're going to share our opinions about police reform and defunding the police. Again, everybody's entitled to their opinions. However, we're basing our opinions of like how we feel, also our, like our ethics, and also based on the research we've done. So something that really caught my eye with the Policing Act of 2020 was this. The kind of like statute that says prohibits federal, state, and local law enforcement from racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling, and mandates training on racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling for all law enforcement. This implies that not all law enforcement were trained this way. It also implied that law enforcement were discriminatory profiling with racial and based on racial, religious, and like just on discrimination. That blows my mind. We're in 2020, and we still have that. We're gonna have to put a law to require this. Like that blows my mind. Like how the police haven't been held to a standard where they don't. Police should be held to a standard where they don't even need that. You know what I mean? Like we're in a time where I thought we've evolved. However, it seems that haven't evolved enough. And another thing with the Policing Act of 2020 is that it doesn't really speak full volumes of transparency between the police and us. If you read in the act, it states here that it states that establish a national police misconduct registry to prevent problematic officers who are fired or leave on agency from moving to another jurisdiction without any accountability. So it does show that when they move departments, it shows how much misconduct they've done. You know what I mean? But it never really says that there's a certain amount of misconduct where they shouldn't even work anymore. Or it doesn't even show that these police misconduct records are shown to the public. Like reform itself, as Sid's talk about, it's a band-aid. It's a quick fix. You know, it does de-escalate issues and problems, but it's not going to be the full, voila. You know what I mean? Instead of having a full cake, we get a cupcake. That's what it is. And I feel like there's so much more we could do. And I feel like having that conversation with your senators, your government officials, like these are things that need to be done. Another thing is defunding the police. I do love seeing that allocating resources somewhere else can help the police. Let's say that if there's issues about homelessness or mental health, or issues that don't really need the police to be there, what if we just reallocate that money to the community? Public health, public health education, kind of that push of having not just relying on one unit such as the police and relying on each other. As a community, I feel like this is a great way for us to unite. And like, of course, I do feel like it's a little bit uncomfortable. Like we don't know if it will fully work. If we defund the police, like who's going to be able to take on that power in the government, like programs, and how we're going to fund that. But I think this is a great step in the right direction to have this conversation and keep pushing that. How about you, Sid? What do you think?
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of what you said. And I think for me, the first thing is that police reform and defunding police are different ways to approach the issue and ways to tackle it and try to fix it. But I also don't think that they're completely different. That I think that they're in some ways that they can almost work together. And I think firstly, talking about police reform, I agree with Noah that it's almost like a, a band-aid, and it's not like a necessarily a permanent solution, but it's a quicker solution potentially. And yeah, with the points that I said earlier, that these are more concrete things that can work more easily with the current system, that they can be implemented faster and hopefully be making some sort of impact. Maybe it's not the ideal impact, but at least something. And then secondly, just defunding the police, honestly, even with my like progressive background generally, when I first heard it, I was against it, or like just that was the natural instinct. And I think it's because I was like born and raised here, and um, that's just what I'm used to. And that's like the bias and the lens that I come from, like a country and a society where the police are an integral part, or like the police as we know it are an integral part of it. Um, and I think it's just up to me and maybe doing research or seeing things that may convince or may just show different ways that this can be a reality and potentially a better reality. So yeah, it's not just defunding the police, but the money isn't going nowhere. It's going somewhere else and re reinvesting into the community in communities and health and education and things like that can have a lot of great benefits. So I think essentially for me, there are two different ways to tackle the issue. I don't know if one is necessarily better than the other, because especially with defunding the police, they can come with a lot of consequences. It can be both good and it can be bad, and a lot of them seen and unforeseen. So it's just something completely different in like reforming that. So it's just trying to prepare as much as possible and plan as much to come up with concrete ideas to implement. And I think as time passes, like communities and um, political leaders and advocates and activists will hopefully create something that will have specific outlines of how that could happen. And I think essentially defunding the police was something I was taken aback by at first, but um, just through looking into it more, I've realized that there could be a lot of potential benefits to it, and there may be a possibility where both can exist, and maybe a police reform is just a band-aid for now, and defunding slowly over time, even starting soon, can be the long-term solution. And yeah, maybe they can happen at the same time. And I hope that regardless of what the steps are, that we as governments, local and federal, take steps towards that. And I think there's a lot of awareness to it, and now there just needs to be action and hopefully laws and reform and potentially defunding.
All right. Thanks, Sid. But again, for everyone that's listening and watching our video out there, I hope that this kind of like motivates you to educate yourself, kind of do that research. Of course, like we could base our research on social media and everything that's being posted, but I'd like to, push if you can to kind of research more, look into your policies, look into like different aspects of these issues and kind of have their self education because it kind of like made me and Sid or made me a little more knowledgeable of like what's happening in our community and what we could do about it. So again, if you have any opinions, comments, or like please do comment down below or share on your own social media page or like write a tweet about it, post a video on Instagram. Like don't let your message be silenced, be heard. So, and again, that kind of wraps up where we would like you to speak up. So next week, we'll be talking about health disparities amongst ethnic groups.